You can reschedule a wedding, Mara. This is Noah's first birthday. That's the exact sentence my brother said to me 5 weeks before I walked down the aisle alone. He said it like he was picking between takeout options, completely unbothered, like my wedding day was a dentist appointment he could move around to fit his schedule. He had already booked his son's first birthday party on my exact wedding day, at the exact same time. And one by one, the way dominoes fall, my entire family followed him. My mother, my aunts, my cousins, even my father, the man who had looked me in the eye at the kitchen table and promised on his word that he would walk me down the aisle. He chose birthday cake and balloon arches at a country club over his own daughter's vows. 8 people showed up to my wedding. 263 missed calls and 194 text messages showed up the moment my family figured out what they had thrown away. That is not a typo. I am going to let that number breathe for a second. My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 26 years old. I grew up in Bexley, Ohio, and at the time of my wedding I was living in Clintonville, a neighborhood on the north side of Columbus, and this is the most honest story I have ever told out loud. Before I go any further, if this opening line already got you, go ahead and hit that like button right now and subscribe if you are new here. I mean it. Drop a comment and tell me your city, your country, and your local time. I read every single comment and I genuinely want to know where in the world this story is finding you today. And if someone in your life needs to hear this, share it with them. Now let me take you all the way back to the Christmas dinner 7 months before my wedding, where my father sat across the table from the man I loved and told him, to his face, that he would never amount to anything worth talking about. Let me start by painting you a picture of the family I grew up in because you need to understand the foundation before you understand why it cracked. The Ellison family lived in Bexley, Ohio, a quiet, well-kept suburb just east of Columbus. Think wide streets, old oak trees, houses with front porches and American flags, neighbors who wave at each other. My father, Gary Ellison, 53, had spent nearly 3 decades working as a district supervisor for a logistics and freight company headquartered in downtown Columbus. He was steady, predictable, and proud of it. Same coffee order every morning, same parking spot, same 3 dress shirts on rotation. He called that kind of consistency backbone. My mother, Sandra Ellison, 51, worked part-time as a librarian at a middle school in the area and spent the rest of her energy making the house on Amber Ridge Drive look exactly the way she imagined a successful family's home should look. Red brick ranch with white trim, a bay window in the front, rose bushes all along the walk. From the outside, we were the postcard. From the inside, we were something else entirely. I have one older brother. His name is Derek Ellison. He's 31. And for as long as I can remember, every single thing in my family, every dinner conversation, every holiday plan, every decision large and small, orbited around him. Derek met his wife, Krista Langford, 5 years ago at a shared friends get-together in Columbus. The Langfords are manufacturing money, industrial components, supply chain contracts, the kind of business that isn't glamorous but prints quietly and steadily. When Derek married into that family, he didn't just get a spouse. He got a whole new identity. Krista bought Derek a $60,000 pickup truck for his birthday the year they got married. She had a diamond-encrusted watch placed on his wrist on their 1-year anniversary. And, more importantly than any of that, she effectively bought my parents' total loyalty. Full stop. Here's what that looked like in practice. Derek and Krista covered the property taxes on my parents' house in Bexley, around $4,000 a year. They financed a full basement renovation my parents had been dreaming about for a decade. Krista put my mother on a shared spending account for clothing, groceries, salon visits, whatever she needed. My parents weren't just thankful in their hearts for all of this. They were financially tied to it in a way that quietly shaped every decision they made from then on. In return, my family treated Derek like he had personally hung the moon. Which was interesting because Derek hadn't held a full-time job in going on 4 years. He referred to himself as a real estate investor and brand consultant, though I couldn't point you to a single investment that had closed or a single brand that had been built. But in the Ellison household, marrying well was the same thing as succeeding. Maybe better, honestly. Because you didn't have to actually do the work. And then there was me. Mara. The younger one. Quiet one. The one who moved to Clintonville, a creative, eclectic neighborhood on Columbus's north side, full of coffee shops, art studios, and people who work 3 jobs because they love what they do, and set up a life there that looked nothing like the Bexley postcard. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment on Indianola Avenue. 1 bedroom was mine. The other I converted into a photography studio lined with equipment shelves, backdrops, and the kind of organized mess that comes with creative work. I made my living as a freelance photographer and graphic designer. Weddings, small business branding, editorial projects, the occasional album cover. Some months were genuinely great. Other months I lived on pasta and the satisfaction of having built something completely on my own terms. I never resented Derek for what he had. What I resented was how completely invisible his success made me. I met Julian Torres 2.5 years before all of this, at a street art festival held along the Scioto Mile in downtown Columbus on a crisp Saturday in October. He was standing in front of a mural he had just completed, a 10-foot-tall, hyper-detailed portrait of an elderly woman tending a garden, painted directly onto the side of a converted warehouse. The detail was unreal. The light on her hands looked real. And Julian was standing there staring at it with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, like it owed him something he hadn't received yet. I laughed out loud at his expression. He turned around. And something about the way he looked at me, not through me, not past me, but actually at me, made me stop moving. We talked for 2 hours. I missed 3 client calls. I didn't care. Julian is a muralist and studio painter based in Columbus. He works mostly in large-scale acrylics, building exteriors, community spaces, custom paintings for private buyers. He's the kind of artist who treats every surface like it deserves to be taken seriously. Some months, the paid work stacked up beautifully and money wasn't a thought. Other months, we counted carefully and cooked at home and called it a good life. We were building something honest together, and that meant more to me than any corporate salary could have. My family never saw it that way. Christmas, 7 months before our wedding, I brought Julian to Bexley for the family dinner. Derek and Krista showed up carrying 2 bottles of premium Napa Valley wine they made sure to price out loud for the room. I showed up with a coconut cream pie I'd been up since 6 in the morning making. My mom placed the wine bottles on the table with both hands like she was handling something sacred. She said nothing about the pie. Over dinner, my father leaned toward Julian with a smile stretched just a little too wide to be genuine. "So, Julian," he said, "when do you see yourself moving into something a bit more practical?" Derek chuckled from across the table. Krista tilted her head and said, "Well, at least Mara's happy, right?" Her voice had that specific kind of warmth that is really just pity dressed up in nicer clothes. Julian said nothing. He just reached under the table and found my hand. What no one at that dinner table knew, what I barely knew myself, was that Julian had recently finished a huge paid mural for a private client that our building's landlord had connected him with. I hadn't pressed for details at the time. I assumed it was another local cafe or office building. Turned out to be the moment that changed the entire direction of our lives. Our landlord, Eugene Park, was 64 years old, Korean-American, semi-retired, and one of the most quietly important people I have ever been lucky enough to know. He owned a 4-unit Craftsman building on Oakwood Avenue in Clintonville, where Julian and I rented the ground floor unit, a beautiful space with 14-foot ceilings, hardwood floors, a separate studio room, and east-facing windows that filled the apartment with golden light every single morning. $850 a month. In Columbus, for that space, that was almost laughably affordable. When I once asked Eugene why he kept the rent so low, he shrugged and said he preferred having people in his building who were building something over people who were just passing through. To me, Eugene was our landlord, the kind man with wire-rimmed glasses and a worn canvas jacket who sometimes left vegetables from his backyard by our door. To Julian, he was something else. Eugene had a habit of stopping by the studio on weekend afternoons, standing quietly in the doorway with a cup of black coffee, watching Julian work. Occasionally he'd say something low and precise, that shadow on the left edge, push it just a degree cooler, and Julian would adjust, and the entire painting would shift into something better. There was also someone else in our building who had woven herself into our world during those years. Her name was Yvette Moreau, 47, a middle school art teacher who rented the unit directly above us, a woman with sharp eyes, strong opinions, and an endless supply of warmth. Yvette had a habit of appearing on Saturday mornings with 3 mugs of coffee, one for herself, one for Julian, one for me, and settling into the corner of the studio to watch Julian work while we all talked. She became family before any of us had agreed to that word. One Saturday morning, Yvette stood in front of a large canvas Julian had been working on all week and said, completely seriously, "This man is going to be in a museum before he's 40. Julian laughed it off. I filed it away. Around the same time, Eugene mentioned to Julian that an old professional contact wanted to look at his portfolio. He asked Julian to photograph his recent pieces and send them over digitally. I assumed it was a small regional gallery or an art consultant doing some casual browsing. I didn't think much about it. I was deep in wedding planning mode. One evening, while I was cleaning brushes in the kitchen sink, Eugene stopped by the door and said something that I stored away without fully unpacking. "Real talent always gets found, Mara. It just takes longer when the person isn't chasing the spotlight." I nodded and went back to the brushes. I was too preoccupied with seating charts to really hear what he was saying. In late January, Julian proposed to me. No jewelry store, no grand production. He asked the question at 11 at night while we were sitting on the studio floor surrounded by canvases, the windows fogged from the cold outside. He had no ring that night, just the question asked quietly and completely certain. He carved a ring a week later from a piece of reclaimed walnut he'd salvaged from a building being torn down on the edge of our neighborhood. Fit perfectly. I wore it every single day. I called my parents that same weekend. Julian and I had chosen a date, July 19th. A small outdoor ceremony at a restored farmstead venue outside Granville, Ohio, about 45 minutes east of Columbus, rolling fields, a stone barn, wildflowers growing along the fence lines. 40 guests. Simple. Ours. My father's first response was, July 19th. Let me pull up the calendar. Not congratulations. Not I'm overjoyed for you. He pulled up the calendar. Called back 2 days later and said he would absolutely be there. That he would walk me down the aisle. I held on to those words carefully, the way you hold something that feels like it might be more fragile than it looks. My mother asked how much it was all going to cost. She did not ask about the dress. She did not ask whether I was happy. Just the budget. Derek sent one text message. Congrats. Okay if you need anything. Then silence for weeks. No call, no follow-through, no offer to help with anything. From the guy who referred to himself as someone who knows how to get things done, this silence should have told me something. Julian and I handled everything ourselves. I designed the invitations by hand, pressed wildflower petals on cream cardstock, each one slightly different. I made our seating chart on a corkboard in the studio. I researched caterers, coordinated with the venue, sourced flowers from a farm an hour outside Columbus. It was a lot of work. I loved every minute of it. Those invitations were honest in a way that a print shop couldn't have produced. I should have caught it sooner, the fact that Derek never once pushed back on our date. Derek had opinions about everything all the time, always. The fact that he said absolutely nothing when we announced July 19th was, in hindsight, a very loud signal. Silence from Derek was never neutral. For weeks before the wedding, I got a phone call from my Aunt Renee, my mom's older sister, a woman who kept her finger on the pulse of everything happening in the family at all times. What she said dropped the floor out from under me. "Honey, are you planning to go to little Noah's birthday party too, or are you just doing your wedding thing? They're both July 19th, right?" I was standing at the kitchen counter holding a mug of coffee. I set it down very carefully. Whose birthday party? Derek's son, Noah's turning one. Parties at that event space in Worthington. Didn't you get an invitation? I had not gotten an invitation. Called Derek immediately. He answered on the second ring, voice already coated in a layer of calm that felt rehearsed. Oh man, Mara, I feel terrible about this. The venue only had that one Saturday left before the fall. You know how these places fill up. Your ceremony is in the afternoon though, right? Couldn't people maybe do both? My ceremony was at 3 in the afternoon in Granville, which is 45 minutes from Columbus on a clear day. The birthday party was at noon in Worthington, which is on the complete opposite side of the metro area. Nobody was doing both. The geography alone made that impossible. Derek knew this. I knew this. Anyone with access to Google Maps knew this. The birthday party, I learned from Aunt Renee, was going to be held at the Grove event venue in Worthington, a premium space with a full catering team, professional balloon installations, a custom dessert table, custom gift bags with everyone's initials printed on them. Derek had described the details to our mother the way you'd describe something that had nothing to do with you, casually, as if the whole thing had just sort of happened on its own. But here is the part that settled into my stomach like a stone I couldn't move. When I investigated further, Aunt Renee confirmed for me that Derek had booked that venue 3 weeks before I mailed my save the dates. 3 weeks before my guests had received anything. He had known my date for months before that. He had looked at my date, picked it on purpose, and said nothing. Mara, I'm genuinely sorry, Derek said, his voice perfectly warm and perfectly hollow. But this is Noah's first birthday. You of all people get it. You can have a wedding any time. I called my mother first. Mom, you know my wedding is that day. Pause that followed already had its answer packed inside it. I know, sweetheart. But this is Noah's first birthday, your father's and my first grandchild. It's a milestone. Is there any way you could push the wedding back a couple of weeks just to make it easier on everyone? Mom, I have paid non-refundable deposits to 3 different vendors. The invitations are already out. My guests have booked travel. Well, I'm sure some people will still make it to yours too. Some people. She said it like my wedding was an open invitation event that might draw a few walk-ins if nothing better was happening. I called my father. He did what Gary Ellison has always done when confronted with something uncomfortable. He passed it sideways. Let me talk to your mother. We'll figure it out, sweetheart. He didn't call back for 5 days. I texted him on day 4. Dad, are you still walking me down the aisle? I watched the read receipt appear. No reply. I called twice. The 3rd time he picked up and said, Of course I will, I told you I would. But his voice had a hollow quality, like a man reciting a line he'd already decided not to follow through on. Something inside me went very quiet. That week I went through my RSVP sheet. Out of 40 family members who had been invited, 25 had already responded with regrets. Every single one of them, without exception, had written that they were going to Worthington. I want to be clear about this. I did not beg. I asked once, directly and clearly, and I made a decision. Whatever answer I received, through words or through the language of logistics and silence, would tell me exactly where I stood. Told me everything. My closest friend, Danielle Reyes, had been in my corner since our sophomore year at Ohio State, where we met in an intro photography class and immediately bonded over our identical taste in bad coffee and good music. Danielle was a physical therapist with a no-nonsense approach to everything and a memory like a legal document. She had been added to the Ellison family group chat years ago when my mom went through a phase of wanting to include my friends. Nobody ever removed her. And Danielle, being precisely who she is, had been quietly screenshotting everything. She came over one evening with her laptop and a bottle of wine and laid it out for me completely. Derek had made individual personal phone calls to every family member on the guest list. Not a group text. One call at a time, working through the list the way you work through a to-do list. To my mother, Derek said, Mom, if you come to Mara's wedding and miss Noah's birthday, I'm going to feel like my son doesn't matter to this family. To Aunt Renee, he said, Krista's entire family is flying in for this. If our side doesn't show, it's going to be embarrassing for everyone. To my father, and Danielle had this one as a screenshot from the group chat. Derek had typed, "Dad, Mara will be fine. She's always been okay with getting less. She's always been okay with getting less." My own brother typed that out, read it back, and hit send. But the deepest wound in all of this wasn't even emotional. It was financial. Derek and Krista's arrangement with my parents, the property taxes, the renovation, the spending account, had created a dependency that made choosing me feel genuinely risky. Nobody had to say it directly. The implication lived quietly in every favor: stand with me or the comfort disappears. My parents had spent years building their retirement around this arrangement. They couldn't afford to test it. I read Derek's message one more time. Then I closed the screen and sat with what it meant. If you are still watching, first, thank you. Second, pause for 1 second and ask yourself, has someone in your life ever made you feel like being second place was just supposed to be your permanent address? Drop it in the comments. Your city, your time, and your story. I want to hear it. And if this is hitting close to home for somebody you know, right now is a good time to share this video with them. The night before I sent a final reminder to my family, Julian and I sat together in the studio. The lamp threw warm light across the half-finished canvases stacked along the walls. Outside, the cicadas had started up, that low, constant hum that means summer in central Ohio has fully arrived. Julian was cleaning brushes, working slowly, not looking up. "We don't need them there to make this real, Mara." A long pause. "But I know how much you want your dad there." I didn't answer right away. I was looking at a painting he'd been quietly working on for 2 weeks, a single wooden chair sitting in a bare room, a window throwing a long rectangle of light across the floor, the chair's shadow stretching out behind it. He hadn't told me what it was about. He didn't need to. That night I wrote one final message to every family member on the guest list. No guilt, no ultimatums, nothing dramatic. Just the details: date, time, address, directions. And at the end, one line: "I hope to see you there." I sent it at 11:14 p.m. Not one person responded. The next morning, Danielle called from Pittsburgh where she'd been visiting family. "I already booked my ticket back," she said. "I'll be there. I will always be there." She didn't ask about the others. She already knew. Yvette knocked on our door that same morning and asked if she could come. "I know I wasn't invited officially," she said, holding her coffee mug with both hands. "But if you'll have me, I'd like to be there." I told her I'd add a chair. July 19th was 12 days away. I had a dress hanging in the closet, ivory crepe, tea-length, found at a vintage shop in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus, altered perfectly by a seamstress in Clintonville who charged me $85 and told me I could stop the traffic on High Street if I wanted to. I had flowers coming from a farm south of Newark, Ohio. I had 40 chairs being set up at the Granville farmstead. What I did not have was a single family member who had chosen me. But I also didn't have the urge to beg anymore. And right there, that exact moment, was the first time something genuinely shifted inside me. July 19th, 7 in the morning. I was sitting in the bathroom while Danielle stood on the counter doing my makeup with the steady hands of someone who doesn't do anything halfway. My dress hung on the closet door. My bouquet, white cosmos and dried lavender from a farm stand outside Buckeye Lake, sat in a mason jar on the kitchen table. My phone lit up. "Dad." I answered. Danielle watched my face and didn't move. "Mara, honey." His voice sounded like someone had taken everything out of it. "I don't know how to say this right. Your mom and I. Noah's party starts at noon, and with the drive from Worthington to Granville, sweetheart, I don't think we're going to make it." I counted 9 seconds of silence. In those 9 seconds, I held my entire childhood. Every drawing I'd run downstairs to show him. Every performance he'd sat front row for. Every moment I had chosen to believe with full certainty that he loved us both the same. And then I let it go. "You promised me, Dad." "I know. I'm sorry, Mara. I really am." But this is Noah's first birthday. And this is my only wedding day. There is never going to be another one. Don't make this harder than it has to be, sweetheart. I hung up. My hands were shaking. My eyes were completely dry. Danielle set down the brush, picked up a different one, and kept going without saying a single word. She didn't need to. At 8:30, there was a knock at the door. Yvette, in a yellow dress, holding a small jar of honey from her garden and a handwritten card. For the most beautiful bride on Indianola Avenue, it read. I hugged her for a long time. An hour later, Danielle checked Instagram and held the screen toward me. Derek had already posted a story. Balloons. Catering setup. Gold and blue streamers. The caption. So grateful to have everyone together for my boy. Posted at 8:52 in the morning. 3 hours before the party was scheduled to start. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything. I just thought, there it is. That's the last thread, and it just snapped. Pinebrook Farmstead venue outside Granville, Ohio sat on 17 acres of rolling meadow and old-growth oak trees, with a restored stone barn and a ceremony lawn that overlooked a pond that turned silver in the afternoon light. Julian had driven out 3 weekends in a row to build the ceremony arch himself. Reclaimed oak beams, sanded smooth, threaded through with wildflowers and white ribbon. It was simple and completely right. I arrived at 2:15. The 40 chairs were already arranged in neat rows on the ceremony lawn. White fabric covers, each chair with a small bundle of dried wildflowers tied to the back. From a distance, it was genuinely beautiful. Like something out of a painting. Close, 32 chairs were empty. 8 people. That's who came to my wedding. Julian, Danielle, Yvette, who had driven the 45 minutes herself without being asked twice. 2 of Julian's friends from his early years in the Columbus art world, a ceramicist named Priya Anand and a photographer named Devon Hall. Eugene Park, our landlord, wearing a dark charcoal suit I had never seen before. And 2 of my college friends from Ohio State who had driven in from Cincinnati the night before and gotten a hotel room without making a single complaint about it. 8 people in 40 chairs. The wind moved through the empty rows and rustled the dried wildflowers like it was trying to fill the silence on its own. I stood at the top of the aisle in my vintage ivory dress, holding my bouquet with both hands. Standing there alone, without anyone's arm to hold, without my father beside me, I felt every single empty chair in my chest like a bruise that hadn't formed yet. The musicians, 2 students from Denison University playing acoustic guitar and cello, began a soft, flowing instrumental piece. The sound moved across the meadow and out over the pond. Danielle stepped toward me. I can walk with you. No, I said quietly. You belong up there with Julian. Go. She squeezed my hand once and walked to her place. I turned toward the aisle. Julian was at the far end. Even at that distance, I could see that his eyes were already wet. I was about to take the first step alone. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow. Steady. Like someone who knew exactly where they were going. I think I may be slightly overdressed for a meadow. I turned around. Eugene Park was standing 3 feet behind me in his charcoal suit, a pale gold pocket square folded sharp silver cufflinks catching the afternoon sun. His expression was the steadiest thing I had ever seen. But if you'd give an old man the honor of the walk, he said, and extended his arm. Something opened up in my chest. Not the sharp, breaking kind of opening. Kind where light comes flooding in through a crack you didn't know was there. I looked at this man. Our landlord. Quiet person who left squash by our door in August and told Julian to push the cool tones just a fraction. And I understood something that hadn't landed before. Eugene hadn't simply been kind to us. He had been paying attention, carefully, consistently, over the full span of knowing us, and had decided quietly that we were worth showing up for. Eugene, you don't have to do this. I know I don't have to. His voice was gentle and absolutely certain. Your father should be standing where I'm standing right now. since he isn't somebody who genuinely values you should be. I took his arm. We walked. The 8 people in those chairs stood up. Danielle was already crying. Priya was smiling with her whole face. Devon had his hand pressed over his mouth. Yvette was dabbing her eyes with the hem of her yellow dress. Julian, at the end of the aisle, pressed the back of his hand against his lips. The ceremony lasted 15 minutes. Our officiant, a retired county judge Julian had befriended through a public mural project in downtown Columbus, kept it honest and warm. We said our vows. Julian had written his in black paint on a small piece of primed canvas and held it in his hands while he spoke. I had written mine on the back of a photograph I'd taken of our apartment the week we moved in. We both laughed. We both cried. 8 people applauded. In that meadow on that July afternoon, it was everything. It was genuinely more than enough. I want to pause right here because if Eugene walking to that aisle made your chest tighten the way mine still does when I think about it, you already understand why this story matters. My father had 30 years to show up for me. Eugene had known us for less than 2. But he was there. If you've ever had someone unexpected walk into a space that family left empty, tell me about it below. I read every single comment. After the ceremony, we ate at a long table in the meadow. Danielle had brought 4 bottles of wine. Devon connected his phone to a speaker and we danced on the grass until the fireflies came out and the air cooled down and nobody wanted to leave. It was imperfect and joyful and completely ours. When the music faded and Julian was helping Devon fold up the table, I sat in one of the empty chairs and opened my phone. 0 messages from my family. Not a single congratulations. Not a sorry we couldn't be there. Not a thinking of you today. Complete silence. As if the day hadn't happened. As if I hadn't happened. I opened Instagram. I knew I shouldn't. I opened it anyway. Derek had posted 19 photos. The Grove venue in Worthington. Blue and gold balloons filling every corner. A dessert table that looked like it came out of a magazine. Aunt Renee laughing with a champagne flute. Uncle Jim holding Noah and grinning. And my father, standing next to Derek with his hand on his shoulder, smiling bigger than I had seen him smile in years. The last post was a wide group shot. Derek in the center, Noah in his arms, surrounded by every single face I had sent a wedding invitation to. His caption read, "The whole crew together. Family is the whole thing." He posted that while I was saying vows in front of 8 people and 32 empty chairs. I zoomed into one of the background photos. Krista was near the side of the room, turned slightly away, phone pressed hard to her ear, her jaw tight in a way that looked completely wrong for a celebration. I noticed it, didn't know what to do with it, and filed it away. I wouldn't think about it again until much later. That night, back in our apartment on Indianola Avenue, Julian and I were on the old sofa with the windows open. The sound of late summer poured in, crickets, a distant lawnmower, someone's wind chimes 2 houses down. We had brought the wildflower bundles home and put them in jars all over the apartment. Smelled like the wedding had followed us inside. Julian was looking at the ceiling. His hand was in mine. "I married the most stubborn, most talented, most ridiculous woman I have ever met," he said. "In a meadow. In front of 8 people. He turned to face me. "I'd do it all over again exactly the same way." I almost smiled all the way. I keep going over it in my head. If I had just made one more call. "You made enough calls." His voice was quiet but completely final, like a door closing gently on a room I didn't need to enter again. "You made more than enough calls, Mara." It landed on me then, not sadness for myself but sadness for him. Julian had stood at that altar watching his bride walk toward him on the arm of a 64-year-old landlord because her own father couldn't be bothered to make the drive. Julian deserved a full room cheering for us. He deserved so much more than 32 empty chairs. "You deserved better than this," I whispered. "You deserved a wedding with everyone there." "This was a real wedding," Julian said. "Eugene was there." Danielle was there. Yvette got in her car and drove herself down. That's more family than blood gave you today. I cried then, not because I was broken but because I was exhausted from holding everything perfectly upright by myself for so long. What I didn't know that night was that Julian was carrying a secret. Something Eugene had set in motion quietly over the previous several months. Something Julian had kept quiet on purpose so our wedding day would not be overshadowed by anything else. Something that was about to change the entire shape of our lives within weeks. 1 week passed after the wedding. Then another. No one from my family reached out. On day 11, I sent one last message to the family group chat. I wrote it carefully, read it 3 times, and sent it. I appreciate the quiet. Said more than words would have. I won't be the one reaching out from here on. When I'm ready to talk, you'll hear from me. My mother replied 2 days later. Mara, please don't be dramatic about this. We love you. Noah's party was just bad timing. Let's not blow this up into something it isn't. No admission. No apology. Just the word dramatic, the Ellison family's preferred response to anyone who dares feel something too loudly. I didn't reply. I muted the thread and turned my full attention to the only thing that had never once let me down. Julian had started a new series in the studio. He called it The Empty Chair. Large format acrylics exploring absence, the specific physical weight of a space where someone chose not to be. A dining room table set for 6 with one chair pushed slightly back, the napkin untouched and still folded. A front porch row of rocking chairs, all occupied except one. A ceremony lawn with 40 white chairs, 32 of them empty, dried wildflowers on each back, afternoon light laying itself down across the vacant seats like a question that no one wanted to answer. I knew exactly what the paintings were about. He didn't have to say a word. One afternoon, Eugene came down to see the new work. He stood in front of the ceremony piece for a long time, coffee growing cold in his hand. Then he took out his phone and composed a message to someone. He didn't say who. I didn't ask. I had stopped waiting for an apology. I was building a life that didn't require one. What I didn't realize yet was that something enormous had already been built, quietly, methodically, over months, and Eugene Park's fingerprints were all over it. 2 weeks after the wedding, Eugene knocked and asked us upstairs for coffee. Not a casual suggestion, an actual specific invitation with a time. He had 3 mugs out, a French press, and a cardboard box sitting in the middle of his kitchen table. "Sit down," he said. "There's something I should have been upfront about a while ago." He opened the box. Inside, gallery exhibition catalogs. Press clippings from major art publications. Photographs of a younger Eugene at gallery openings alongside artists whose names I recognized from museum placards. "I ran Park Contemporary for 19 years, he said, placing one of the catalogs in front of us. Locations in Columbus and Chelsea, New York. I represented 31 artists over that time. 11 of them are in major permanent collections today. I stared at him. The man with the canvas jacket who left zucchini by our door. "You never told us. You didn't need to know yet." He folded his hands. "I needed to be sure about Julian first. I've spent my whole career learning the difference between technically skilled and genuinely rare. Julian is genuinely rare." Then he told us everything. 8 months earlier, before the proposal, before the wedding, before any of this, Eugene had assembled a digital portfolio of Julian's work and sent it to a woman named Sasha Brennan. Sasha was a private art consultant in New York with a 20-year track record of placing work with serious collectors. She had a reputation in certain circles for having an almost unervingly accurate eye. Sasha had responded within 48 hours. She purchased one piece for $68,000 and forwarded the portfolio to her primary long-term client, a collector named Franklin Osei, whose holdings were referenced in catalogs from institutions on 3 continents. I looked at Julian. He nodded slowly, and I could see the weight he'd been carrying, the thing he'd been holding carefully so it wouldn't spill onto the wedding. I was going to tell you after we got home, he said. I didn't want money to be the thing you remembered about that day. Over the following days, the full picture became clear. Franklin O'Sea's legal team had reached out to Julian with a formal commission agreement, 14 original studio paintings over the next 20 months for Franklin's private collection. Total contract value, $390,000, paid out in chunks as Julian finished each painting. Who owned the art, how it would be shipped safely when each piece was due, everything was written down and locked in tight. Attached to that agreement was a separate letter from the director of Kemper and Shaw Gallery on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, one of the most respected spaces for contemporary figuration in the country. They were inviting Julian to hold a solo exhibition. The centerpiece would be the empty chair series. We drove to New York to sign the paperwork at a firm in Midtown. I sat in a leather chair at a long conference table and read every page twice. The numbers kept blurring. My hands were trembling, not from fear but from the feeling you get when something you always believed in finally gets seen by the rest of the world. This is more money than my father earned in 6 years at the logistics company, I said quietly, almost to myself. Eugene placed his hand flat on the table. And this is only the beginning. Franklin builds long relationships with the artists he works with. This opens every door Julian walks toward. We hadn't told anyone. My family still believed Julian was a guy who painted murals and made rent work through sheer grit. They had no idea what had already been signed and sealed. A week later, Sasha called Julian directly. I was in the studio when he put it on speaker. His hands were covered in paint. Julian, I understand your honeymoon trip didn't exactly happen the way it should have. Franklin and I want to do something about that. He has a standing arrangement with a villa property in the Amalfi Coast, Villa del Tramonto, just above Positano, about a 20-minute drive from the port. Sleeps 6, it's fully staffed, and it sits on a cliff looking directly out over the Tyrrhenian Sea. He'd like you and Mara to have it for 12 days in September. Consider it a professional thank you for the first 4 pieces. Julian covered the phone and looked at me. We can't just... Eugene says this is how Franklin builds working relationships with artists he's serious about, Julian said. It's professional, not a handout. I thought about 40 chairs. I thought about 8 people who showed up and 32 who didn't. I thought about every single time in my life I had made myself smaller so that someone else wouldn't feel uncomfortable next to me. Not anymore. Yes, I said. When I told Danielle a few days later, her reaction was immediate and loud. You are going to a private cliffside villa above Positano, Italy for your honeymoon, and your whole family thinks Julian can barely cover utilities? Mara. She laughed until she had to put the phone down. They have zero idea what's coming. They don't know, I said. And I'm not going to tell them. I wasn't hiding anything. I had simply stopped performing for an audience that had already left the theater. While Julian and I were preparing for the trip, news about the Langford family business began surfacing through Aunt Renee's occasional texts. 2 big manufacturing contracts had fallen apart at the same time. A facility expansion loan had defaulted. The company that had made Derek the golden son-in-law of the Ellison family was quietly imploding. Derek's truck disappeared, replaced by a used SUV. Krista, whose social media presence had been constant and carefully curated, went completely silent for 3 weeks. For her, 3 weeks of silence was the loudest possible alarm. Then my mother called for the first time since my wedding day. Her voice was a half-step too bright. Hi, sweetheart, how are you? Listen, your father and I were thinking, would you and Julian like to come for dinner Sunday? It would be so nice to catch up. I leaned against the kitchen counter. I'm busy, Mom. Oh. Okay. Well, your father says hi. I hung up and stood there for a moment. The math was completely obvious. When Krista's money flowed, I didn't exist. The moment it started drying up, the Ellison family rediscovered they had a younger daughter. What none of them knew was that in 3 weeks, a photograph taken on a cliffside above the Mediterranean was going to make everything that had just happened look like the first chapter of a story they hadn't read yet. We flew into Naples on a Tuesday morning in early September. A car took us up the winding coastal road through Positano and then higher, along a narrow stone lane that ended at a pair of wooden gates. They swung open, and there it was. Villa del Tramonto sat on the edge of a cliff above the Amalfi Coast like it had been placed there specifically for someone to look at and reconsider everything they thought they knew about the world. Terracotta floors, whitewashed archways, lemon trees and terracotta pots lining every path. Our bedroom had a private terrace that jutted directly out over the water, the Tyrrhenian Sea right there, 40 feet below, so deeply blue it looked painted. The bathroom had hand-painted Vietri tiles and a window that framed the coastline like a photograph. Every morning, someone had placed fresh figs and espresso on the terrace table before we were awake. I stood barefoot on that terrace the first morning in a linen dress I had picked up at a little market in Positano the afternoon we arrived, and I watched the light move across the water, and I thought about the farmstead in Granville and the 8 people who had shown up, and I thought, this is what it looks like when the world finally catches up to you. Sasha flew in for 2 days midway through our stay to introduce Julian to a pair of European collectors she worked with, a couple from Milan who collected contemporary figuration and had, it turned out, already heard Julian's name. We had dinner on the terrace one evening, the 4 of us, with a bottle of local white wine and a view of the coast going from gold to orange to deep purple as the sun dropped. "Your work is going to be wanted in this part of the world," the collector from Milan said to Julian. "Mark it down." On our last evening at the villa, I did something I almost never do. I posted a photo on social media. My account had maybe 230 followers. I hadn't posted in months. But as the sun touched the water and the light turned everything warm gold, Julian came up behind me on the terrace and wrapped his arms around me, his chin resting on my shoulder. On the stone table beside us, 2 espresso cups, Julian's open sketchbook, and the corner of the Kemper and Shaw gallery press materials with his name printed on the cover. I took the photo. Then I wrote the caption without thinking too hard about it. "Honeymoon with my person. Grateful for the ones who actually showed up." No tags. No explanations. No drama. I posted it at 9 in the evening Italian time, 3 in the morning back in Ohio. Then I set the phone on the nightstand, got into bed, and fell asleep to the sound of the sea moving below us. When I woke up the next morning and reached for my phone out of habit, my screen was a wall of notifications I had to scroll through for a full minute before I could see the bottom. 263 missed calls. 194 text messages. 457 total notifications waiting for me when I woke up. I want you to sit with that number for 1 second. The exact same people who could not find the energy to send a single text on my wedding day had 457 things to say the moment they saw where I was standing. If you are watching this right now and your jaw just dropped, good. Share this video. Right now. 'Cause someone in your feed needs to see this. Hit like if you are still with me. And drop your city and time in the comments. I want to see exactly where in the world people are watching this at whatever hour it is where you are. I sat on the edge of those Vietri tile floors and read through everything slowly, the way you read a document that changes things. My father, 19 missed calls. 13 text messages. The first one said, "Mara, whose property is that?" Then a series of them building in urgency. "Is Julian working with a gallery now? Why didn't you tell us any of this?" And finally, at 4 in the morning his time, "Please call your dad, honey. I'm worried." Worried. He was worried. The man who had called me on my wedding morning to say he wasn't coming was now calling 19 times from his kitchen in Bexley. My mother, 15 missed calls. 10 messages. "Oh my goodness, Mara. Is that Italy?" Followed by, "Are you safe? And who does that property belong to?" And eventually, "I am so proud of you both, sweetheart. We need to celebrate when you're home." Celebrate. The woman who asked about my wedding budget before she asked if I was happy now wanted to throw a party because she saw the Amalfi Coast in a photo. Derek, 9 calls, 5 messages. The last one said, "Mara, we seriously need to connect. Call me when you can." And then the wave of everyone else, aunts, uncles, cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in years, flooding in one after another. "Oh my gosh, congratulations. So happy for you both. We always knew you two were going to do something incredible." The same people who had declined my wedding invitation were now standing in line to say they had believed in us all along. And near the bottom, a message from someone who had never once messaged me privately in the entire time I'd known them. Krista Langford. "Mara, hi. I hope the trip has been amazing. I'd love to connect when you're back. Is Julian working with a gallery to sell his work? Derek knows some people who might be interested in connecting." I read that twice, set the phone face down on the tile floor, and left it there for an hour. Julian found me on the terrace eventually, coffee in hand, phone nowhere near me. He didn't ask what the messages said. He could read it in my posture. "I'm not going to pretend none of this is real," I said. "But I'm also not going to let it take up space in what's left of this trip." He sat down across from me. We watched the water. That afternoon, I opened the family group chat for the first time since I'd muted it. I wrote one message, revised it twice, and sent it. "Thank you for reaching out. Julian and I are doing well." For those who are wondering, Julian signed a major paid art contract 2 months ago. The villa belongs to his collector, who offered this as a professional courtesy for the work. I want to be honest with everyone rather than let this turn into something it isn't. I'm not going to pretend July 19th didn't happen the way it did. My father promised to walk me down the aisle and chose not to be there. My mother chose a birthday party over her daughter's wedding day. My brother picked my wedding date for his event on purpose. He knew exactly what he was doing. I am not angry anymore. But I need time and space. When I'm ready to talk, I will reach out first. Please respect that. I sent it. Then I put the phone away for the rest of the day. My dad called that evening. I didn't answer. 2 days later, after we were back in Columbus, Derek posted an Instagram story. A beautifully lit dinner table at my parents' house. Candles, wine. Caption, "Family dinner tonight. Wish everyone was here. Wish everyone was here." As if I were simply absent. As if I were the one who had walked away from something. Some people will rewrite the story right up until the moment the whole room already knows the truth. 3 weeks after we got home, Kemper and Shaw Gallery issued the press release. Julian Torres, The Empty Chair solo exhibition. It went to every major art platform and publication in the country. Feature previews ran within 48 hours. Then the one that changed everything, a full feature in a national arts publication with a photograph of Julian standing in front of the centerpiece of the show. The painting, a ceremony lawn in afternoon light. An arch of reclaimed oak wood threaded with wildflowers. 40 white chairs in neat rows across a meadow, dried wildflowers on the back of each, afternoon light lying across the empty seats like a question nobody wanted to answer. 8 of the chairs held warm, living, painted figures, rendered with the unmistakable care Julian reserves for people he loves. The other 32 were empty. The title, July 19th price, $108,000. Already sold. Franklin Osei had claimed it before the exhibition opened to the public. The article noted that Julian's work captured family absence and emotional pain with a sharpness that felt deeply personal and also hit like a gut punch for anyone who has ever been left out. It mentioned Eugene Park's legacy in the contemporary art world. It used the word unreal. On opening night, more than 200 people came through Kemper and Shaw. Collectors, curators, critics, people from 2 major museums. I stood beside Julian in a simple black dress and watched strangers stand in front of paintings born from the worst morning of my life and get emotional. A journalist approached near the end of the evening. The title, July 19th. Is that based on your real life? Julian didn't pause. Yes. It was our wedding day. 8 guests. 40 chairs. The room went quiet. Then the questions started. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. I hadn't planned this. Julian hadn't planned this. But the truth, once it finds the right room, doesn't ask anyone for permission. My father saw the coverage first. Someone forwarded it to him. I can picture him sitting at the kitchen table in Bexley with his reading glasses on, looking at those 40 chairs rendered in paint by a man who remembered every detail of the morning his own father-in-law didn't come. My mother called. Her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard from her before. "Mara, your dad saw the painting. He's been sitting in the kitchen for 2 hours. He hasn't said anything." "I didn't paint it, Mom." "Julian did. He painted what happened." She didn't have a response for that. Derek's reaction was entirely different. He wasn't sad. He was furious, specifically about the exposure. His friends started asking questions. "Wait, is that your sister's husband? Why weren't you at her wedding?" The image Derek had spent years carefully constructing, close family, great guy, always there for people, now had a 40-chair-shaped hole right through the center of it. Krista reached out to Julian directly through someone they both knew. "Huge congratulations, Julian. I wanted to reach out about potentially having Julian create something for us." Julian was polite and clear. "Thanks, Krista. All paid work and new requests go through Kemper and Shaw and through Eugene. They handle everything." Aunt Renee sent me a screenshot from a family group chat I was no longer part of. Derek had written, "She's doing this to humiliate us in public." And my father, for the first time I could remember, had replied, "Maybe we should have gone to the wedding." My mother's response, "Let's not do this right now, Gary." Even with the truth on a gallery wall in front of 200 people, no one in my family was able to say the 3 most basic words: "We were wrong." 2 months after the opening, the news came through slowly and then all at once. The Langford Manufacturing Company had filed for bankruptcy protection. 2 contract failures, a financing default, creditors moving in. The firm that had made Derek the golden son-in-law of the Ellison family was now a name in a court document. The effects reached my parents almost immediately. Property tax arrangement was gone. My mother's spending account was closed. Derek traded down again on the car. Krista began selling jewelry through a consignment platform, pieces she had once worn like a personal trophy case. My father called me. First time since the coverage had run. "Mara, I don't know how to say this right." His voice was thin. "Worn. Your mother and I might lose the house. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. But I wanted to call because..." I let the silence sit for a moment. I think he needed to hear it. "Dad," I said, "I need you to understand something before I say anything else. On July 19th, you made a choice. You promised to be there. You called me that morning and told me you weren't coming. I walked down to my husband on the arm of our landlord because my own father decided the drive wasn't worth it. I heard him breathing. I'm not going to tell you no. But I need you to hear me first. I am not your backup plan. I am your daughter. And for a long time, you treated me like I was optional." A long silence. "You're right," he said, quietly. "You are completely right, and I'm sorry. It wasn't a full reckoning, but it was real. It was a beginning." Derek called 3 days later. First time we had actually spoken since before the wedding. He opened with the old nickname, "Hey M," the one he used when he needed something. Within 30 seconds, the softness had slipped. Krista and I lost basically everything. Mom and Dad are in real trouble. You and Julian are doing so well now. Can't we just get past all of this? Get past what exactly? My voice stayed level. Not cold, just clear. The wedding thing. All of it. I never meant for it to go down the way it did. Derek, you booked that venue 3 weeks before my save the dates went out. You called every family member individually and made your case to each one. You told Dad I was always okay with getting less. Do you remember saying that? Silence. I was stressed. I was trying to pull off this whole first birthday for Noah, and Krista had all these expectations, and I know, I said. Not as forgiveness, just as a fact I was putting down on the table. And you're going to have to carry that. I'm not here to make you feel worse. But I need you to understand that I see exactly what happened. I've always seen it. I just chose not to say it for a long time because I wanted us to be a family. His breathing changed. I love you, Derek. But I am not going to spend another decade letting that love be used against me. If you want a real relationship, it has to start with honesty, not with a request for money. He hung up. He didn't call again for 6 weeks. I set the phone down and walked to the studio where Julian was finishing the 12th piece in the series. A long table with 10 place settings, one chair pulled back at a slight angle, napkin perfectly folded but completely untouched. He looked up when I came in. How'd it go? He hung up. Julian nodded. He'll call back eventually. Maybe, I said. But whoever calls back better be a different version of the conversation. Those are the only terms I'm working with now. Julian went back to painting. I picked up my camera. The crickets outside went on like they always do, completely indifferent to all of it. 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of a house I owned outright. A 2-bedroom craftsman bungalow on a tree-lined street in Granville, Ohio, 10 minutes from the farmstead where we had gotten married, and about 45 minutes east of Columbus. Wide front porch, hardwood floors throughout, a sunroom off the back. The entire ground level had been converted into Julian's studio, proper ventilation, 14-foot ceilings, north-facing windows that gave him the light he needed, and a back door that opened onto a half-acre yard where I was putting in a cutting garden come spring. We had paid for it completely on our own. No mortgage. No help from anyone. Nobody else's name on anything. Julian had completed the Empty Chair series, 14 finished paintings that had hung at Kemper and Shaw for nearly 5 months. Nearly every piece found a buyer. Total revenue exceeded $560,000, and the wait list for his next body of work was already building before the last painting came off the wall. Franklin Osei had extended a second commission proposal. 2 galleries in London had reached out. A museum in Chicago had requested a studio visit. My own work had taken a turn I hadn't seen coming. An art director from a major children's book publisher had attended the Kemper and Shaw opening. She had recognized my editorial photography style from a branding project I'd done 2 years earlier and tracked down my contact. Her team offered me a multi-book illustration and photography contract for a new picture book series. The first book was about a little girl who turns a vacant lot in her neighborhood into a wildflower garden that changes the entire block. I was working on the spreads every morning at the dining table while Julian painted 1 floor below. Eugene came for dinner every Sunday. He drove over from Clintonville in his old Volvo, brought a bottle of wine that was never expensive and always good, and sat at our table like he had always been there. Because in every way that actually mattered, he had. Yvette came most Sundays too now. She would arrive with something she had baked, settle into her chair at the table, and hold court like she had been coming for years. She had, in every way except the literal one. One Sunday, I served roast chicken with herbs from the pots on the porch. Eugene raised his glass. "To the empty chairs," he said. Julian clinked his against Eugene's. I clinked mine against both of theirs. A people at a wedding. Every single one of them still in my life. On a Thursday afternoon in late October, I heard a car pull into the gravel driveway. No one had called ahead. I opened the front door. My father was standing on the porch steps. Flannel jacket, hands in his pockets, looking older than I had remembered him, not in the way of time passing normally, but in the way of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and finally understood that he had been the one choosing to carry it. "I didn't come to ask you for anything," he said. I waited. "I came to tell you I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that's looking for something in return. The kind that knows it has no right to expect anything back at all. He stood there in the October light with leaves drifting across the porch steps, and I could tell he had rehearsed this. Not because it wasn't genuine, but because it was. He had needed to find the exact right words. I was eating finger food at a birthday party while my daughter got married with 8 people, he said. I am going to carry that for the rest of my life. I know, Dad. My voice was quiet and steady. You can come in. Julian just made coffee. He stepped inside. He walked through the house slowly, looking at everything. The studio through the glass door. The backyard visible through the kitchen window. Julian's paintings on the walls of the hallway. He stopped. A small study painting hung near the coat hooks by the front door. July 19th, Study 1. An early version, 8 chairs occupied, 32 empty, wildflowers on each back, afternoon light across the grass. My father stood in front of it for a long time without saying anything. Then he reached into the canvas bag he'd been carrying and pulled out a wooden frame. Inside, a certificate from a regional youth photography competition I had won at 17. My name at the top. Paper had gone slightly yellow at the edges. I found this in a box in the attic, he said. It should have been framed and on your wall 15 years ago. I took the frame from him. And I let him stay for coffee. People always want to know, did you forgive them? The real answer is that forgiveness isn't something that happens once and then it's done. It's more like a path you keep choosing to walk. Some days steadily, some days you stop and look back and wonder if you're going in the right direction. You just keep going anyway. Derek wrote me a letter eventually. Real paper, handwritten, mailed with a stamp from Columbus. It wasn't a perfect apology by any measure. But it had one sentence in it that I had been waiting years to read. I picked that date on purpose, Mara. I told myself it was about logistics, but it wasn't. I was scared that if your wedding went really well, everyone would finally see that you didn't need any of us, and I'd lose the one advantage I'd always had. I read that sentence 4 times. Then I folded the letter and put it in the back of my desk drawer, not in the trash, not displayed anywhere. In the drawer where I could find it on my own terms when I was ready. My mother calls once a week now. She asks about the photography work, about Julian's new series, about how the garden is coming along. She does not ask for anything. That is a small thing, but it is a completely true one. Derek and Krista are starting over in a smaller apartment in the short north neighborhood of Columbus. Derek took a position at a smaller logistics firm. Krista got her first real job in years, events coordinator for a regional arts nonprofit. From what Aunt Renee tells me, she's actually good at it. I genuinely hope so. And me? I'm standing on the back porch of a house I paid for with my own work, watching the last light settle over the yard where the lavender will come in the spring. Julian is in the studio below me. I can hear the soft scrape of his palette knife through the window. Eugene is on his way. Yvette is already here, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, calling out questions about dinner. 40 chairs. 8 people. 457 calls and messages. In the end, the numbers never really mattered. What mattered was that I stopped counting the people who chose to leave and started counting the people who chose to stay. Here's the thing nobody tells you about self-respect. It doesn't require a big fight or showdown. It doesn't require an audience. It doesn't even require that anyone else admit what happened. It just requires that you stop setting yourself on fire to keep people warm who would let you burn without a second thought. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever sat in a room that should have been full of the people who were supposed to love you best and found it empty, I see you. You were never invisible. You were never optional. You were just surrounded by people who hadn't figured out yet what they were throwing away. Now I have a question for you, and I really want you to answer this one. If you woke up to 263 missed calls and 194 text messages from the same family that had nothing to say on your actual wedding day, would you pick up? Or would you leave every single one unanswered? Drop your answer in the comments right now. And while you are down there, tell me your city and your local time. I check the comments every single day and I respond. You are not just a number on a screen to me. This story stayed with you, please share it. Text it to someone. Post it on your story. Send it to the one person in your life who needs to hear that self-respect is not cruelty. It is the most important thing you will ever choose for yourself. Hit the like button if you made it this far. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe if you are not already here. I post new stories every week and I promise every single one is worth your time. There is another story waiting for you in the description below. Go find it. Might be exactly what you needed today.